Welcome to Stories of Creative Courage. How are you today? Where are you today? Let us know where you're coming from.
Manchester. I am in my little flat in South Manchester, and I am very
Chester,
well.
UK.
Yeah.
Good, good. Yeah, good. Well, it's great to see you. It's really wonderful to have you as a guest on Stories of Creative Courage. Before we dive into who you are and what you do and what your creative expression is, I'd just like to say a few words. And so, welcome to all the people joining us on the call. Hello, Anne. Really good to see you joining us. Just say a bit about Stories of Creative Courage and where it came from. There's Jason joining us as well. Welcome. So, in my own work as a creative and the work that I do to support creatives, what I notice is that there's always an element of fear about showing up, fear about being seen. You know, as creatives, we might want to be seen and fully express ourselves, but also we have this terror, and it has its roots, that fear has its roots in old stories, old scripts, past conditioning, all of that. So there's definitely a pattern that I've noticed in my own creativity and that of others. And to me, I think the more we can share these stories of vulnerability and the more we can actually acknowledge that the fear is a thing and that courage, if we can gather it and we can find that courage within us to express, then we express and we create from a very different place. So it doesn't mean that we get rid of the courage, the fear, rather, because I don't think we ever really do. But I feel like compiling and curating this series been a really amazing journey for me, just to really find out from lots of different people with different kinds of creative expression, like what shows up for them and what gets in the way. But also, there's a lot of power in witnessing and supporting each other. So the more we're honest about it and talk about it, then that actually the power of the fear diminishes somewhat, I would say. And there's a lot of power in that collective energy around creativity. So that's why we're here, Stories of Creative Courage. And today I'm thrilled to be joined by Sara Riccardi. And Sara is an art historian and an art history communicator. And I'm going to pause there because I know we'll talk a lot more about what that means on this conversation. An art history communicator. I had never
Mm.
heard this term before, and I would think you may have invented it. um, it feels to me as though it's something new that you're bringing to the space of art history, which I feel we'll touch on in this conversation. So Sara is really committed to bringing the history of art to everybody, making it accessible, making it understandable. So kind of removing art history from the ivory tower of academic institutions and universities and actually making it understandable and accessible for a range of people. So it's a very radical thing that you're doing, Sara. I could say a lot more about that. I know that your PhD studies are also focused on this and what is it to be an art history communicator and how can you or how can we communicate art history differently? Um, but I just want to tell a little story about how I know you and well, not how we met, but how I first heard about you, which was before we
Mm.
even met. Before we'd even met, there was a gallery owner in Manchester who was really singing your praises. So Ian Hay of Saul Hay Gallery in Manchester in the UK. And he was saying, you really must check out Sarah's incredible courses and her events because she really brings art history to life. She's amazing, this woman. And so that's the first time I ever heard of you. And then it was only when I met you that I put these two things together. So even before I met you, you were this legend of making art history understandable and accessible to people in a really entertaining and insightful way. So that's a bit about Sara and who she is and who you are. Sara, welcome. It's so good to have you with us today.
Way to make an introduction and put me at ease. Thank you. That's a wonderful story. I am thrilled to be here. I feel very honored that you thought that we could have this conversation and bring something insightful on this topic. I didn't know that story. I am forever grateful to Sohei Gallery. They are one of the first places that I started working with when I didn't even know what I was doing. And they just were open to saying, yes, you can come to our gallery and do events and connect to our exhibitions and test out this thing that you are thinking of developing. And that was in 2017, a ridiculous amount of years ago at this point.
Great. So, of course, I'm dying to ask you the question of what is an art history communicator. But within that, I mean, you might want to talk about that, but also, generally as a way in, we say, what is creativity to you? How does your creative expression show up? So it may be that the communicator bit comes into that. So, yeah, over to you. Anything you want to share with us about creative expression and how it shows up for you?
I can combine the two questions for sure. Well, it will look like I am taking it from a long way away, but I will bring it back to the question, I promise. The question of how creativity exists in my life, how I engage with creativity, the reality is that for a very long time, I absolutely did not consider myself to be a creative person, particularly. But I was extremely excited by other people's creativity. And that is what brought me to study art history at university. I did my undergraduate and master's at the University of Rome. I mean, living in Rome, being born in Rome, means that I was surrounded by millennia-old creativity since I was a child, which is an incredible experience to have and to take for granted while you're living there until you then move away. But so when I think about my relationship with creativity for a long time, I think about my interest in engaging in the deepest way that I could with other people's creativity. For my studies, I specialized in 15th century art, so I was trying to understand and read into the creative expression of people from many centuries ago. And I still remember the frustration sometimes when I was writing my master's dissertation of looking at these frescoes that I was studying and thinking, if only you could jump out of the page and tell me what is it that you were trying to do here, or who you were working with. And then I came over to the UK and I started engaging with contemporary artists. And I realized they can actually tell me what they are doing. That is incredibly exciting. And I got even more excited. So this was my way in engaging with creativity without even realizing that the expression of how different people see the world and the worlds that they create as a response to that was drawing me in. And then what happened was that I started doing this thing. I can try and tell you how I see the idea of art history communicator. Yes, I think I've made it up. I used to call myself freelance art historian, which is different. And now I am defining a bit more the fact that the key of it is the communication of art history topics. I am in the process of potentially coming up with an even more invented word, and that will be part of the PhD study, but we'll touch on that maybe later. But anyway, what I do with that is I take what is a scholarly discipline, which is the discipline of art history. And then I try to translate it somehow, translate its language, translate its traditional content into something that can be, as you were saying earlier, more accessible to more people. And also, most importantly, that can provide experiences that go beyond the intellectual engagement or the interest. So what that looks like in practice is that I turn up at galleries or people contact me and say, would you like to give a talk on this topic? Would you like to bring an art historical angle to the idea of environmental sustainability? That's one that I've done. Would you like to respond to this contemporary art exhibition, creating parallel between their work and the work of artists from 3 centuries ago? Would you like to work with this filmmaker and think about the difference between the still image and the moving image. So in that way, I use the medium of communication and public events, and the content is art history, but then there is a transformation that happens to that content when I then get to present it.
Mm. I love that you I love that you use the word transformation, because
Uh,
you're actually crafting experiences for people, which sounds to me incredibly creative. You are actually taking people through, you're initiating them into change in some way. I mean, I think that's at the heart of creativity. And then yeah, interesting that you talk about translation,
mm,
because the title of your business, if you like the umbrella under which you do that, it's called Art Across. And across is the etymological root, isn't it, of translation? So it's a literal translation of, this is the story, this is the experience. You're actually getting people to understand the language of art in a way that they couldn't before. So you are the translator, which I love. And I love that, you're Italian. So, and you're kind of, you're speaking in English, and, it's fascinating, really, these different modes of communication and creativity that are going on in that. Um, yeah. So in terms of like creativity, it's interesting, isn't it? Because this is a thread in so many of the conversations that I have with so many people. I never thought I was creative.
interesting.
It happens, I almost without exception. I think on every single story of creative courage, someone has said, I didn't think I was creative, and
Hmm.
um, because I think one of the things we have as a culture is a very narrow definition of what creativity is, which is that we have to make something. We have to be the painter and make a painting in the field of art, or make whatever it is. And actually, I had the same conversation today, actually, with somebody earlier today. There's this spectrum, where
Mm,
there's a maker, kind of, someone creates a creation, and that's one way of doing it. But then at the other end, there's this act of service, which is, in service of other people, other people's
ah,
creativity. You're bringing together different threads, or different, modes of communication, or different ideas, or whatever it is, and packaging them, or expressing them, and then presenting them. And so, in a sense, that's a very process orientated way of thinking about creativity, I think. So yeah, I just
certainly.
wonder, yeah, if you have any kind of reflections on that. That's how I thinking about
Well,
it.
I want to also acknowledge something. I say all of these things that I do and all of these ambitions that I have in when I produce an event, when I come up with an idea of how to convey some art historical content. The very idea that what I aim at doing then ultimately ends up being successful. And when people come at the end of an event and say, I knew this artist, but I'm now looking at it in a different angle, always blows my mind. It's really still really difficult to believe that I can actually facilitate that experience. I know that that's what I desire to do and that's what I intend to do, but it's not as easy to believe that actually I make it happen, or yeah, I help the experience. And that's part of the acceptance element of what you're saying, and definitely the spectrum as opposed to the narrow definition of creativity is part of it. It's part of facilitating, accepting that many more things than what we can initially think can be defined as creative. And that was definitely my issue, was definitely influenced by the fact that because I engage with visual arts, that to me is the bar for creativity. And to even conceive, to put myself in a realm that was even remotely associated with that seemed really arrogant at first. But then
Mm,
also slowly and gradually, what changed a little bit the perception that I had of what creativity could feel like for me was starting to observe the experience of the process that took me from an initial idea to the final event. That
mm,
process as you were saying, has some characteristics that I've started to accept, feel quite creative. And the beauty of this is that what forced me to do that slow observation of the process was the choice of making this work, of creating artistry events, the practice element of the PhD. So the interrogation of that work forced me to look at it closely, to analyze it, to start writing about it. And by doing that, I started unpacking, oh, actually, this that happens to me at this stage is something that I would call creative. So maybe there is creativity in this. And there's a fire that happens inside that ultimately I think I associate with creativity. But the definition of it is something that I absolutely don't have yet. I don't know if anyone has come up. I think there are many attempts at a definition of creativity, but ultimately the best ways to identify what elements are in common are to listen to the experiences of people, which is what you're doing with this.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And I love that there's the realization that actually what you have is a creative practice, that the events that you curate and deliver and invite people into is a practice that's just as valid as being a visual artist in a more conventional way, painting a canvas. um I'm curious about what gets in the way of your creativity, if anything.
Well, you kind of give it away with the title of this series. I did try to think about something else but fear, and the truth is that I couldn't think of anything else. Is the is the is the sense of wanting, feeling the urge, feeling the desire, again, feeling that fire to go and do something. In my case, it's thinking about how do I combine all of these bits of information in a flow that makes sense or is exciting or brings out a new perspective. Having the urge to do that, and then having the voices and the thoughts that go, all of the what ifs and all of the fears that slow down that drive. And I was reflecting a little bit on what those fears specifically say when it comes to attempting a creative expression. And I thought about two things. One, as I was reflecting about creativity and the word itself and the idea of creating, as in making something exist in reality, whatever that is, that wasn't there before. So there is an element of unknown where you are attempting, where you are engaging in creative effort in the broadest sense as we can think. Something will have happened or will have existed after that wasn't there before, that hadn't been expressed in the world before. Whatever this creative output, including just the process, but whatever that is, I think there's an element of something new exists. And so that brings the fear of what will it be?
Yes, we
What
don't know.
we don't know.
Yeah, yeah, we have to surrender to the not knowing, and
And
there's a
that's
big yeah. Go ahead.
and that's not easy. So
No, not at
that's an
all.
easy thing to be scared of.
Yeah, yeah, the unknown. It requires an act of faith, the consistency of showing up and kind of, it's a cliche, feel the fear and do it anyway. But there is
Mm-hmm.
something in that kind of the being prepared to sit with the unknown and be kind of go create from a place of faith, whatever that means, and to know that after enough times that will be that it will just have an energy of its own. Um, I love the way that you're talking about creativity as bringing into existence something that's not already there. And you talk about fire, like creative fire. And I really think that we, as human beings, have this evolutionary like pull that we have to like create and express and move into those spaces in order to keep growing, keep evolving, keep having different experiences of what it is to be human. And so I love what you what you say there is that we're moving into that empty space that doesn't exist yet because we're continually evolving as human beings, which is just, that's the really cool thing that I think about creativity, is that we're, it's the kind of, it's the double-edged sword. So being afraid of like, oh, I don't know what I want to create. I'm moving into the unknown. But equally, it's this sense of like, anything could happen. Anything's possible. I am being more of myself by expressing this, even from that fearful place. So I love that. Yeah. What else comes up for you around fear and courage in this space then, in terms of like what gets in the way for you, or where you've stepped up and you've had to maybe work with that fear or try to overcome it, if that's possible? Like, is there anything that you want to add on that?
Well, there's the other piece. So the fear of, I am engaging in something and I don't know the outcome. And I personally, when I am working in a way that I consider at this point to have an element of creativity in it, part of it requires me to let go a little bit of the mental or intellectual control over what the process is. So the fear internally and the fear when I am just on my own is about what is it that is going to come up? How am I going to make it work? What if it doesn't work? And also, what if the process itself doesn't take me where I think that I would like to get? In the case of being commissioned events, for instance, it might happen that someone gives me a brief, respond to this book. This is an event that I did a few years ago. It was with the Portico Library. They have a literary prize every year. There's an emerging novel that wins the Portico Prize. And they wanted, as part of the events, to promote it or to raise awareness about it, that I responded to the winning book of that year. Here's the book. Do whatever you want with it. That is a place of do whatever you want within bringing some art history connections to it. That's a scary place because of the multitude of unknowns. And also, there is a level of expectation that I need to meet. And what if I can't come up with something? So there's all of that, which I've learned to ride in the sense that it has never happened so far that something doesn't come together at the end. So in the sense of going with the fear, yes, I try to do that. And sometimes it means sitting down and doing a lot of actually intellectual work and rationalizing a lot of things, because I know that I am still processing and being in the process, even when I feel uninspired. And that fire that I was mentioning before is not necessarily there, but I am still engaging with it. And I know that eventually that flow comes back. So there is the navigating of, I don't want to do it, I don't know what happens, but I still continue doing it. Now I don't feel inspired, so I want to do it even less, but I still try and push, and then the inspiration comes back. But then this is all fears that exist in the space where it's just me and the medium. Then there's a whole realm of fears when it comes to imagining the output experienced by others. That's another world of various different types of fears. And I think that not necessarily all creative experiences produce something that is tangible in some sort of way and is possible to be experienced by others, but very often that can be the case, that is the case. Certainly that is the case for me. So then, of course, all of the fears of how will it be received? Will it work? Will the things that I am hoping to provide as an experience to those who will engage with this event, will that experience work for them? And what will they think of it? And all of the even very common, I think, judgments about what if they don't like it, very simply put. What do I do with that? Well, I just breathe through it and hate the feeling in the previous 2 hours before an event. That is the fear that comes up more when it comes to the delivery, in my case. So there's the fear during the process, and there's the fear just before the delivery. And that fear comes up in any case in which I need to exist. And even today, in the half an hour, maybe hour before logging in, there's that thought in my head, which is, why did I say yes? Why? I could just have had a quiet, relaxing, private evening. And that thought, why did I get myself into this? I have before every single event, even though I have created it all for myself. Nobody in the first place asked me, start doing these things, please. I made that situation where I at some point have to be in front of a group of people or with a group of people and engage with art in some ways. I've made it up for myself, and yet still there's that, why did you do this to yourself?
Yeah. And as we were saying earlier before we went live, you're in a different position in this situation, because normally you're like me, you're being the interviewer or you're being the speaker, kind of speaking to someone else and facilitating the conversation. Whereas actually in this situation, it's very different. The spotlight is on you. You're the guest, and I'm asking questions of you. So yeah, it's a strange thing. And I'm so glad that you said yes and found the courage to come and do this, because this is fascinating. So yeah, for those who are just joining, I'm with Sara Riccardi, and we're talking about, we've got onto the kind of territory of fear, haven't we? And finding courage, and how do we sit with the fear? Yeah, you've said a little bit about what that is for you and how you do that. I'm curious if you have any more to share about how do you sort of how do you sit with that? Like, do you have practices that help? Do you just kind of, yeah, what happens for you?
Well, it depends on which stage of the fear we're talking about. The fear that happens just before I am going to go live, I am going to step in a room where I know there's an audience, that fear, there's the obvious things. I saw at some point in a number of years ago something about power poses before a job interview, and I
Oh
do
yeah.
that. I go I tend to be very much on my own just before an event, especially if it's live, as in person. And I just find a quiet angle where hopefully people don't see me, and I just stand very straight, raise my arms, open my shoulders, like tell my body that I feel confident and happy and empowered and excited to be doing that, which are all true things. That's the thing. The excitement and fear and excitement sometimes can be two faces of the same coin. So I try, in the moment when we're talking about the fear before going live, I try to swap that coin, flip that coin from the fear emotion to the excitement emotion. The fear that happens, and I just tell myself, at this point, I can tell myself, you've done it so many times. You always feel like this. It's okay. The feeling doesn't go away. It's unpleasant every single time. But also, I know that in my case, when I start talking, when I start engaging with people, when I start focusing on the art, which, as you say, is not me, so that helps, things get much better. The fear during the process is the thing that actually sometimes has stopped me more from moving forward. And I don't know, I have some things that I know will help. As I say, one of them is to try and remove the pressure from, I'm creating this thing that needs to have all of this inspiration in it. And I focus on the very menial. I start making the PowerPoint presentation. I go into some reading and do some research, which is more of an intellectual. It's something that I can approach in a more intellectual way. So sometimes when the feeling of wanting to find that flow, wanting to engage with the material in a way that gets me excited, feels too much, I just try and keep that on a side and focus on the things that are more material instead, even though in my case, it's not physically material. And sometimes forgetting about the ambition of creativity informing what I'm doing helps, because I'm not focusing on that. And in a way, creativity finds its way back in, but more gently and maybe in ways that are not as scary.
Mm.
That's something that I've found helps in the process.
Mm. I love that so much. It's like I hear the wisdom of the body in that, in terms of the fear before the delivery. I love that. So the power poses comes from Amy Cuddy, I think, who's a psychologist or something. There's a famous TED talk. I
Yes.
link it to the show notes. It's brilliant, and I too have tried that before an interview or something, going into the toilets and just because we are actually putting our body into shapes that seem confident so that the mind will then follow. And I love that so much as a strategy, to help with that kind of formativity anxiety that
Mm-hmm.
can sometimes come up. But I'm hearing a lot in what you're saying. So two things. The first is choosing the small step, taking the small action. So not letting the fear paralyze you, but just focusing on the micro action. Or in the coaching training I did, we talked about turtle steps, which I really love, like this very slowly taking the tiniest step, that's possible. So breaking it down so it feels less overwhelming. I think that is a fantastic strategy. Um, and underneath all of that, what I hear and what you're saying is focusing on the thing outside of yourself,
Mm.
which I personally also find helps enormously. If I can forget about my fears, or if I can downplay them and think about who am I creating for
Yes.
and why am I creating, and
Yes.
opening the space beyond little me and why and what they might think of me, and I might get it wrong and it won't be good enough and all of that stuff, then that's a really expansive space to step into, I think. And so that's where the service element comes into it, I think. In terms of what you're doing,
Certainly.
because as we were saying, you are acting as a translator, which is an act of service for people. You are taking what your knowledge and your understanding of art and particular artworks, and you're transmitting that. And so there is an act of service there. And so what happens in the process, I imagine, is that your ego goes through the mill. Necessarily, it becomes painful, but then you just keep going, and like you said, it doesn't get any easier. Well,
Not really.
well, maybe not. I don't know. I mean, how you've been doing that 7 years? Is it just the same? Is the fear the same, or has it got better over the years? Like, how has that
No,
worked out?
the fear is the same, which is
Right.
somehow surprising. I thought at first that it would get better over the years. What has got better is my ability to, not even my ability to deal with it. What has got better is the fact that every time that I go through that, I know that I've been there before. So it's
Right.
just the track record of
Mm.
all of those fears not necessarily coming into play, coming into action. I mean, but I got distracted as I was saying it, because the truth is that sometimes things haven't gone really well. There have
Mm.
been events where my ideas and how they landed didn't quite match. And there was a lot of adjustment that needed happening in the moment. So some of those fears can also be conducive to challenging how I do things in a constructive and more creative way.
Hmm.
Not necessarily always have, primarily they have the risk of slowing me down and preventing me from really exploring something in depth. But in some cases, there's something also that can be learned from, necessarily not from the fear, but from the memory of something that maybe hasn't gone as I thought, and
Mm.
that can inform what how I continue to working creatively and continue to allow that spontaneity as well, and that need to let go of controlling every step of how something comes together, knowing that there is the risk of it not landing in the way that I thought. Um, but allowing for that. So to go back to your question, no, it hasn't gone better, but knowing that most of the times the fears that I have don't become real helps in that sense.
Yeah. It's almost like knowing that failure is not the end of the world. Like we're not going to die,
Exactly.
although our brains haven't really evolved since, we were cave people. And so we feel like, we feel the fear as if it's a threat to our survival. That's actually what happens, isn't it? And so
Yeah.
to know that actually that's not going to happen, I feel the fear, but, it will be okay in the end. What you're
It will be
describing.
okay. It
Yeah.
will be okay even if it actually
Even
goes a
if.
bit bad.
Exactly. Even if I get it wrong or it doesn't land or people
Mm-hmm.
don't like it, even if.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those experiences of so-called failure, they're not failure because they give us so much more information. They create that possibility of doing something fresher, more, like differently in the future. I like to think of that as I shared this phrase with my group coaching, my circle, and I called it productive failure, and they were like, "No, we don't like that." Productive failure. And then we kind of reframed it and called it generative failure. The
Yeah, that's
failure is the thing
exactly.
that
Yeah.
generates the new information or the new field of inquiry or the new way of being or whatever it is. And so I too have had my big challenges with the appearing to fail, not wanting to fail, and all of that. But kind of coming at it from actually, even if this fails, there will be something generative coming from it. I think is a very helpful way to put it.
That's exactly what I was trying to articulate, not too eloquently, but yes, I love that phrase. Yeah.
Yeah, generative failure. That's it now. And yeah, there's probably a,
Mm-hmm.
a
Mm-hmm.
Substack post on that topic somewhere down the line for sure. So in a way, that the way I see fear is it kind of keeps us small. We develop a whole load of strategies that wrap around the fear to keep us safe because we don't want to feel the fear. It's too painful. This is the human experience. And so we develop strategies, let's call them survival mechanisms, that prevent us from feeling the fear or being in it too acutely or too painfully. Um, I think the kind of the opposite of that is when we can move towards what we call, or what I call sometimes, our essence, which is that unfiltered part of ourselves before we started developing these survival mechanisms that layer up. That's how I think essence kind of transmits. And I think in the field of creativity, the more we can bring in or accept or recognize our essence, then the more we're likely to be able to be comfortable with those survival mechanisms. I'm curious for you about how that lands as a definition, but also whether you have some additional thoughts on what essence is for you in this field of creativity.
I think that this is something that I need to continue exploring. In the process of accepting the creativity that exists in my practice, how much of that creative expression speaks to my own essence is very much still a work in progress. What I do know, though, is that there is a moment, and that's something that I've been referring to a bit earlier, talking about a certain flow in the process that isn't always there, that I know I cannot control. I know I can't make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
But when it happens, I think, that's what I think when you say essence, which might be slightly different to what you mean, probably because my relationship between my essence and the creativity is still in progress. But there is this moment where I have the pieces in front of me. I have the bits of content that I know need to somehow take a shape, which will be more than the sum of its parts.
Mm.
And there's a click. There's a moment where I can't describe it in any other way. Things fall into place. And of course, not magically, not by themselves. The time that I've spent doing the turtle steps, doing the practical things, doing the completely controlled intellectual research, all of that feeds into that moment of click.
Mm.
But that moment is in my perception of my creative experience, the essence of where I feel like I can justify calling it creative, because that moment is outside of my full control. So it is a moment where everything works out. And I now know, in the case of what I work with, what is the thread that connects everything that I am talking about. I know what is the specific angle that I am giving it. I know where is the original thought that I am bringing to whatever theme I'm talking about. I know why I start with one image and I finish with an image. Often there's a circular structure to what I do. The point is that I know all of these things all at once in that moment where the penny drops.
Mm.
And I know that, again, although I've had an input in making that happen, I had to put the clay on the wheel, metaphorically. I feel like there's something that's beyond me in a way that I can't quite describe. And maybe that's what they call inspiration.
Mm.
I'm not sure. But there's something beyond me that that contributes, that works with me
Mm.
in giving. It's almost as if the things come into shape by themselves. And
Yeah.
that is to me the essence of why what I do feels
Mm.
creative. And that's the most beautiful feeling. That's why I do it. When I tell
Yeah.
myself, why did I put myself into this? Because of that moment and because of witnessing that being received by others and being somehow received, really taken on. That's a privilege. That's beyond me. That's beyond the content. It's the coming together of multiple things with something beyond all of the things.
Yeah, I love that. What occurred to me as you're talking is there's a lack of separation in that moment when the click happens. You know, it's you, embodied human Sarah, and then there's the kind of out there, you know, the universe or whatever, let's call it. You know, there's a kind of harmonizing that happens in that moment, and then this beautiful loop of like giving and receiving. You know, you know, in order for you to give, you need to experience that kind of
Yeah.
alignment of, you know, the inside, the outside, the material things like all the information and knowledge and the PowerPoint presentations and all of that, you know, and then there's this sort of bigger energy which
Mm.
emanates from you, which is the, you know, linked to purpose, linked to why you're doing it, linked to the beauty, linked to connection, and all of those reasons why you do what you do. Um, so I think what you've just described, yeah, we could call it creative flow. And I also hear in the way you talk about it, this beautiful harmonizing that happens in that process, which is just so cool.
It feels really cool when it happens. It certainly
Yeah.
feels really cool.
Yeah. It's lovely. Yeah, it's a really great way to think about it, I think. And then when there are those moments, then of course the fear does drop away, only perhaps
Yeah.
momentarily, in my experience. Like those moments of flow and alignment don't last very long, but they're beautiful when we experience them, I think. Um,
There's fear related to that because
mm,
because I experience it, I would never be satisfied with creating and delivering an event that has not had that moment of click in the process. But because I can fully control when it happens or how it happens, part of the process fear is, what if it doesn't click and I just need to put out a series of interesting facts, which is never going to be enough. It's always happened so far. It's never not happened.
yeah. And it happens in person in the galleries that you go into, the places that you go in to speak, and also online because you lead online workshops and events as well. So, yeah, we were kind of running out of time to talk about the difference between those two things, and it's maybe a conversation for another time. But just to say that I think the way that you're innovating in this space is really inspiring. And, one of the reasons I wanted to get you on here to have this conversation was to get your particular take on creativity and what it means to you. So it's been a delight, Sara, to talk to you. And before we log off, though, how do we find you? Where can we track you down to find out more about your work?
Yes. So at the moment, my work in terms of outwards delivery is a little bit dormant because I am trying to write up the PhD, which you will know, anyone who has engaged with the process will know is time consuming. So, but I do have a website which is, I can say it's the artacross.co.uk. And I have the Instagram account, which is Sara_art_across, all in one word. On the website, there is a newsletter sign up, and I only send newsletters when I am delivering something, as you say, either online, which can be reached from anywhere, or in person, which is primarily in the Northwest region in the UK for now. Those are the online places where people can find what I'm doing, but to manage expectations at the moment, I'm not doing much.
No.
Writing a PhD is its own creative experience.
It is. There's a whole, yeah, I'm sure there's a kind of PhD writers
Oh, yeah.
experience that we could talk about on another live. There's a whole other set of courageous acts that have to happen there. I will put all those links in the show notes when I write up the recap post. But Sara, thank you so much for finding the courage to come on today and be the one in the hot seat rather than the one asking the questions. It's been amazing to talk to you. Thank you for sharing everything. Thank you to everyone who's here and witnessing this as well. And I hope that you have found something here to take away that's inspiring and will, bolster your own creative courage in whatever way your creativity shows up for you. So until next time, see you all later. And Sara, thanks so much again.
Oh, thank you. It's been a joy, really.
Yeah, it's been great. All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much. Bye.